Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin defend the Biden administration's $100 billion emergency aid request for Israel, Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, and U.S. border security. They testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee. As the new House Speaker Mike Johnson pushes ahead with a plan to vote on a standalone bill with only aid to Israel and have money offset by cutting IRS funding. It's something the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer again rejected today. The Senate confirms former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew to be the next U.S. ambassador to Israel. The vote was 53-43. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas gets questions at another Senate hearing about the rise of anti-Semitism in the U.S. on college campuses and elsewhere with the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. President Joe Biden announcing a proposal to target when a financial advisor recommends a retirement plan investment, not because it benefits the saver, but because the advisor gets a big commission. It's the latest in what the president calls junk fees. Supreme Court takes up two cases concerning when public officials can block their constituent critics on social media accounts that may be used for some official business but are mostly personal. We'll hear some of the Supreme Court oral argument and talk with the Hills Courts and Legal Affairs reporter, Zach Schoenfeld. Story from the Associated Press: the nation's top military and diplomatic leaders urged an increasingly divided Congress on Tuesday to send major, immediate aid to Israel and Ukraine, arguing at a Senate hearing that broad support for the assistance would signal U.S. strength to adversaries worldwide. The testimony from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken came as the administration's massive $105 billion emergency aid request for conflicts in the two countries encountered roadblocks. While there is bipartisan support in the Democratic-led Senate for aid to both Ukraine and Israel, the request faces deep problems in the Republican-led House. New Speaker Mike Johnson has proposed focusing on Israel alone and slashing money for the Internal Revenue Service to pay for it. That from Associated Press. The hearing was held by the Senate Appropriations Committee today, testifying the Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. As Secretary Blinken began, he was interrupted by protesters calling for Israel to end its military campaign in Gaza, which Israel says it's doing to eradicate Hamas after Hamas's deadly attack on Israel 3 weeks ago.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today.
Of densely populated areas. Stop supporting the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. Ceasefire now. Save the children of Gaza. Save the children of Gaza. Ceasefire now. Where is your pride, America?
I recognize that people feel very passionately, but I ask that we have order in this hearing room and respect our speakers. We will move forward with the hearing and allow the people here and the American people to hear from their witnesses. Senator Blinken.
That protester during Secretary of State Antony Blinken's opening statement at the Senate Appropriations Committee was just one of about a few dozen who shouted ceasefire now and save the children of Gaza, many of them raising their hands painted red, symbolizing blood. After police cleared them from the room and the hearing continued, the chairwoman, Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington State, asked the witnesses to defend the Biden administration's supplemental aid package, especially linking the $14.3 billion for Israel to the $61.4 billion for Ukraine.
Some of my colleagues in the House and a few in the Senate are pushing to provide only the emergency military funding for Israel and not the rest of the president's request in this security supplemental. Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin, I would like each of you to address this question. Why is it so important that we provide supplemental funding for Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, and humanitarian assistance in addition to military aid to Israel? And Secretary Blinken, I'll begin with you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's very important to understand that the elements of this request work together as a package. As you know, the defense industrial base operates in a complex way. It's an interdependent unit. Making these investments together allows us to do what's needed to strengthen the defense industrial base and to seize the benefits and efficiencies that come from making these investments together rather than making them piecemeal. We also know, as you've heard, that increasingly Russia and Iran are working together to challenge our leadership, to hem us in globally, to pose a growing threat to our own security as well as to that of our allies and partners. They've been partners in a devastating war in Syria, and now we have Iranian proxies firing missiles from Syria in northern Israel. Russia could stop this, but it doesn't. Instead, to the contrary, its government is hosting Hamas for talks in Moscow. Iran is sending UAVs to Russia to attack Ukrainian civilians. So we're seeing the profound connections here. What happens in Ukraine, what happens in the Middle East also matters for the Indo-Pacific. Beyond Europe, we know that our allies, as well as our adversaries, as well as our competitors, are watching that conflict. They're watching our response. The global impacts of Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine further stress the importance of ensuring that the Indo-Pacific does not learn the wrong lessons from these conflicts. So the funding request that we put before you is vital to securing a free and open Indo-Pacific in the face of mounting challenges in that region that threaten to undermine the international rules-based order, including things like freedom of navigation. In other words, to put it succinctly, for our adversaries, be they states or non-states, this is all one fight. And we have to respond in a way that recognizes that. If we start to peel off pieces of this package, they'll see that, they'll understand that we are playing whack-a-mole while they cooperate increasingly and pose an ever greater threat to our security as well as to that of allies and partners. And one final thing. I think when it comes to the humanitarian assistance, and we can come back to this, it's first and foremost vital because this is who we are. We know that when it comes down to it, in each and every one of these conflicts, people are suffering. Men, women, and children. Parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents. And I think it's profoundly who we are to want to do everything we can to assist them, to try to lift some of the horrific burden that they're bearing from being caught in the midst of conflict. At the same time, it's vitally important as a strategic proposition that we provide the assistance that we can to help people in need. We've seen Hamas and other groups play the siren song of nihilism to try to attract people to their perverted cause. We want to make sure that we have a better response, that we have a better answer across the board. That's part of the strategic proposition, as well as one that's profoundly humanitarian. Thank you.
Secretary Austin.
Thanks, Chair Murray. I think it's important to remind ourselves that what happens in Ukraine and what happens in Israel matters not to just Ukraine and Israel. It matters to us. It affects our national security as well. We also have to remind ourselves that these countries are in a fight. They're fighting every day, and there are people dying every day. And in Ukraine, Putin continues to attack civilians and commit war crimes that are despicable. And so these countries urgently need the resources to ensure that they can continue to defend their sovereign territory. You know, in Ukraine, Putin has felt that he could wait us out, and that's part of his strategy. It's the main part of his strategy. He feels that the West will get tired of supporting Ukraine, and he'll soon have his way. If that's the case, if we don't support Ukraine, then Putin wins. But Putin will not stop in Ukraine. We know that. We all know that. And so I think it's important to do what's necessary to support Ukraine and Israel and to help them defend their sovereign territory. But as the Secretary said, as Secretary Blinken said, this is also an investment in our defense industrial base. It helps us replenish our stockpiles and gives us additional depth and agility that helps us do what we have done over the years, over the centuries, over the decades, around the world. And so I think this is very important that we provide the support, and it's important that we provide the support now in both cases.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin testifying beside Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Senate Appropriations Committee. The question's coming from the chair, Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State. The president's $105 billion national security supplemental spending request, in addition to the money for Israel and Ukraine, also has $9.1 billion for humanitarian relief in Gaza, $7.4 billion for the Indo-Pacific, that's basically countering China's influence, and $14 billion to deal with U.S. southern border security. Senator Bill Hagerty, Republican from Tennessee, asks Secretary Blinken today about the aid to Gaza, whether the Palestinian people or the group Hamas will get a hold of it.
At a high level, can you tell me the amount of funding overall under your watch that's gone into Gaza?
So overall, we provided about $1 billion in assistance to the Palestinians through the UN Works and Relief Agency.
That's a significant amount of money. I look forward to going through the detailed response you provided, and I appreciate that commitment to do so in a timely fashion. I'd like to tell you why I am asking this. I want to make certain that you can guarantee that not one dime of U.S. taxpayer funding is going to, the funding that's going to Gaza is going to benefit Hamas and their terrorist activities. Yeah. Has that happened? And I think the question I'd like to ask is, can you guarantee us that no taxpayer money, no U.S. taxpayer money, went to fund the attack that Hamas delivered in Israel on October the 7th?
So we have, and we've had from day one, and we'll obviously get back to you in response to this letter, a robust monitoring, inspection, verification system for the assistance that goes to any international organization, and including.
Can you guarantee, though, that U.S. taxpayer dollars didn't go to Hamas to help fund this attack on October the 7th?
So everything that we're doing in terms of making sure that the assistance is used for purposes for which it's designated, not for other purposes. As I said, we have a robust system in place.
Can I share my concern, Mr. Secretary, to be more specific about this? In May of 2021, I traveled to Israel after the 11-day war. I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu with his national security advisor. They briefed me and my team on the fact that every humanitarian aid dollar, every foreign aid dollar that goes into Gaza is controlled by Hamas. They either direct it, they tax it, or they divert it. They even take pipes intended for the water system for civilians and turn those into rockets that are aimed at Israel. We've seen Hamas's own videos demonstrating this. So I'm going to come back and ask you, can you guarantee that U.S. taxpayer dollars weren't used in October 7th attack?
What I can guarantee is that we take every possible precaution to ensure that these resources are not diverted. Second,
let me come at it another way then, Mr. Secretary, because your own State Department has made an internal assessment on this. Madam Chair, I'd like to submit for the record a set of internal State Department emails from 2021 that were obtained via FOIA. And Secretary Blinken, I'd like to specifically read from part of that. The assessment of your own State Department in 2021 is that, quote, due to Hamas's overall strength and level of control over Gaza, there is a high risk that Hamas could potentially derive indirect, unintentional benefit from U.S. assistance to Gaza. Secretary Blinken, do you agree with this assessment?
I do. And here's the challenge that we face, Senator. We have in Gaza somewhere over 2 million people, the overwhelming majority of which, virtually everyone, not a member of Hamas, and indeed increasingly disgusted.
I understand. I'm talking about Hamas's control over the funds, not the citizenship there. And with respect to their control of the funds, can you guarantee that the U.S. isn't funding both sides of this war, Mr. Secretary?
It is important that the one agency that has the ability to operate either directly or through agencies that it works with, and that we have robust controls in place to ensure that the money.
Let me come back to this because I need to reclaim my time. I'm losing it. Israel has said that Hamas is diverting foreign aid. Hamas has even demonstrated that with their own videos. Your own department has warned about the high risk. And I've yet to see, but I hope to, that where the actual funds flow is coming to Hamas from our government to Gaza. But I'm deeply concerned here, and we need to be convinced that we're not funding both sides of this war, that U.S. taxpayers aren't put in a position of funding a vicious cycle. And I think this department I mean, I think your department needs to confirm that with this committee. We need that level of detail so that as we appropriate a massive request for funding, we can assess the risk ourselves, Mr. Secretary.
And Senator, we'll work with you on that, and we'll get you the information. I want to respond as robustly as we can to your letter. I also want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can for the 1 million children in Gaza who desperately need
I hear you.
Food,
I just don't want to see the U.S. taxpayer
support.
funding both sides of this war
Mr.
in Israel with
Secretary,
Hamas.
and I hate to interrupt, and I know you.
Senator Bill Hagerty, Republican from Tennessee, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken at today's Senate Appropriations Committee hearing. You can find the full hearing at cspan.org, our video library. A story from thehill.com. The effort to pass an emergency defense spending package through Congress is turning into a mess. Senators say that new Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana's demand to separate Israel funding from Ukraine and offset the $14.3 billion in Israel aid with cuts to the IRS budget isn't going anywhere in the Democratic-controlled Senate. It's uncertain whether Speaker Johnson can even get his controversial proposal passed through the House, where Republicans hold a slim 4-seat majority. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, declared the House Republican proposal to cut IRS funding to pay for aid to Israel dead on arrival in the Senate. He said it's a non-starter. It's a poison pill. They're reporting from The Hill. Speaker Johnson defended this position to pay for the Israel aid with offsets cutting the IRS during an interview on Fox News.
This is a matter of good versus evil. I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu said just a couple of days ago is exactly right. It's good versus evil. It's light versus darkness. I spoke with him on the telephone, I think it was Saturday night. I've known him for some time, and we spoke in those very clear terms. And we understand what's at stake here. And I hope that everyone will put politics aside, get that bill over the line. We're going to have pay-fors in it. We're not just going to print money and send it overseas, because the other concern we have that is overriding this is our own strength as a nation, which is tied to our fiscal stability. And that's a big problem that we have as well. We have to keep it in mind as we try to help everyone else.
How's it going to be paid for?
We're going to be releasing that here shortly, but
okay.
My intention and my desire in the first draft of this bill is to take some of the money that has been set aside for the building and bulking up the IRS right now. They have about $67 billion in that fund, and we'll try to take the 14.5 necessary for this immediate and urgent need. We'll deal with the rest of that issue later.
Do you think that will drive away some Democrats in the Senate or here in the House?
It may, but my intention is to call Leader Schumer over there and have a very direct and thoughtful conversation about this. I understand their priority is to bulk up the IRS, but I think if you put this to the American people and they weigh the two needs, I think they're going to say standing with Israel and protecting the innocent over there is in our national interest and is a more immediate need than IRS agents.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, in a Fox News interview with Kayleigh McEnany. More about his proposal to cut IRS funding and spend the money on aid to Ukraine, and also voting on aid to Israel not tied to aid to Ukraine or the Indo-Pacific or the U.S. southern border, as President Biden wants to do. Here is the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, with reporters today.
House Republicans released a partisan and woefully inadequate package with no aid to Ukraine, no humanitarian assistance for Gaza, no funding for Indo-Pacific, and poison pills that help wealthy tax cheats avoid paying their fair share. And the irony of it all is their whole idea with pay-fors is to reduce the deficit. This poison pill increases the deficit. Their price for helping Israel and abandoning America's responsibilities around the globe, making it much easier for the ultra-rich to cheat on their taxes. How the heck could that be their highest priority? It's only when the hard right governs the Republican caucus. All friends of Israel should say loudly and clearly that any move to make the U.S.-Israel relationship a partisan one is a move that hurts Israel. The House GOP package is woefully inadequate, has the hard right's fingerprints all over it, making aid to Israel, who just faced the worst terrorist attack in history, contingent on poison pills that help ultra-wealthy tax cheats. It's insulting that the hard right is openly trying to exploit the crisis in Israel and try to reward the ultra-rich. The new Speaker knows perfectly well that if you want to truly help Israel, you can't propose legislation that's filled with poison pills. And this kind of unnecessary partisan legislation sends the wrong message to our allies and adversaries around the world.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today. The Senate Republican leaders also held a news conference, and the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky told reporters that he does support linking aid to Israel with aid to Ukraine and the other priorities from the Biden administration.
What is your reaction to the House Speaker's Israel-only bill?
Well, that's an opinion many people have. It's not surprising, but in order to make a law, it has to pass both bodies and be signed by the president. And we'll see if the bill comes out of the House, and if so, what kind of margin it has. My own view, I just expressed, is that we need to treat all four of these areas, all four of them: Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the border.
The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell with reporters today. From NBC News, the Israeli military reported fierce battles with Hamas deep inside the Gaza Strip as its ground operation pushed deeper into the north of the enclave and rescued a soldier who had been taken captive. The IDF said a massive strike on a refugee camp in northern Gaza killed a senior Hamas commander who was one of the architects of the October 7th terror attack. Dozens of others were killed and hundreds wounded, according to Gaza's Indonesian hospital. Israel's national security advisor said there is no hostage deal in sight, adding the end of the war is not close because Hamas must first cease to exist. That from NBC News. Back to the U.S. Senate today, senators confirmed Jack Lew to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel, replacing Thomas Nides, who left the position in July. The Senate vote was 53 to 43, 2 Republicans joining the Democrats in voting yes, and the independents: Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Rand Paul of Kentucky. Here's some of the debate before the vote. Jim Risch, Republican of Idaho, Foreign Relations Committee ranking member, was a no vote. He said it was because of Jack Lew's actions when he was Treasury Secretary under President Obama concerning lifting sanctions on Iran tied to the Iran nuclear deal, officially known as the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
He promised us in the committee that he would not allow Iran to have access to the U.S. financial system. We know for a fact that after that, although he denied it, he did in fact attempt his very best to have Iran have access to the U.S. financial system. This is borne out by an official report of the United States Senate by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. They interviewed the banks that Mr. Lew's attempts to twist their arms to give Iran access to the financial system. There was a very detailed investigation that was done on the fact. The facts are contained in this report. My good friends will say, oh, but that wasn't a bipartisan report. It is an official report by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. My friends on the other side of the aisle, though, will not deny the facts that are in this report. And the facts are that Mr. Lew was involved in this as I've described. I want to support Israel. I think everybody on this floor wants to support Israel. The last thing we need is somebody who is very contrary to our view on how Iran should be handled.
Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, Foreign Relations Committee ranking member on the Senate floor before the vote on Jack Lew to be U.S. ambassador to Israel. Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, the Foreign Relations Committee chair, responded.
He is so well qualified for this position. He's been confirmed by the Senate as the former Secretary of Treasury, as a Deputy Secretary of State, as an OMB director, and the list goes on and on and on. Confirmed by overwhelming majorities. It gives us the person as our representative to Israel that has the gravitas to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel as the United States partners in the challenges that they're facing today. So there's, to me, no question about his qualifications, no question about his presence being welcomed by our Israeli friends, no question about his knowledge and commitment to these issues. He's worked his entire life, part to strengthen the U.S.-Israel partnership. He knows the values. He testified to that during this confirmation hearing, and he testified in regards to the issues that my Republican friends are raising. The issues of whether he was forthright with Congress, and he was. He pointed out that in regards to opening up the banking for Iran, it was to comply with the JCPOA that was negotiated by the Obama administration, in which the Republicans were opposed to, and I opposed that agreement.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, the Foreign Relations Committee chair on the Senate floor before the vote of the Senate to confirm Jack Lew as U.S. ambassador to Israel. The vote again, 53-43. The FBI Director Christopher Wray told the Senate Homeland Security Committee today that the attack by Hamas and its allies on Israel will lead to the greatest terror threat against the United States since ISIS conformed a decade ago. Officials have noted an increase in threats against Jews, Muslims, and Arab Americans since the war between Israel and Hamas began. Testifying alongside the FBI director was the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Senator Jackie Rosen, Democrat from Nevada, asking about anti-Semitism.
Following Hamas's brutal October 7th terrorist attack on innocent Israelis, our nation has witnessed a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic threats and incidents targeting Jewish Americans, including Jewish students being threatened and harassed on college campuses. According to the Anti-Defamation League, reported incidents of anti-Semitism have increased by 388% compared to the same period last year. Government agencies have a responsibility to ensure the safety and security of Jewish Americans. I'm encouraged that the administration's supplemental budget request includes a significant allocation for the life-saving nonprofit security grant program, which I have been calling for. There's still so much more to be done. Last week, Senator Langford and I led a bipartisan, bicameral letter to DHS and FBI requesting their immediate attention to this crisis and a briefing on the current threat assessment, the interagency coordination efforts, and preparedness and resiliency measures that are in place to prevent and respond to violence against Jewish Americans. So to Secretary Mayorkas and then Director Wray, can you please commit to providing members of Congress with this briefing we asked for? And could you outline the specific actions your agencies are taking to prevent and respond to this alarming rise in anti-Semitic violence?
Senator, you certainly have my commitment for that briefing. It was just a couple weeks, I think, before the terrorist attacks of October 7th that I attended and spoke at the Eradicate Hate Summit in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and met with survivors of the Tree of Life tragedy. On October 8th, I participated in a convening hosted by the Anti-Defamation League, where more than 700 participants heard from me with respect to the threat landscape and what we would do to address the aftermath of the horrific terrorist attacks. Since then, we have engaged every day with the Jewish American community, as well as other communities of faith that feel under tremendous threat, to educate them about the steps they can take to ensure the safety and security of their worshipers and their members. We have deployed our protective security advisors in each state to work with communities of faith. We have shared information and intelligence with our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement partners in partnership with the FBI. I have spoken with a number of leaders of colleges and universities with respect to their need to take leadership and to ensure the safety and security of the students on their campuses. We are doing a whole series of actions to address this moment.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas getting a question from Senator Jackie Rosen, Democrat from Nevada, at today's Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, also asking Secretary Mayorkas about what's been happening on college campuses.
Secretary Mayorkas, let me start with you. You're familiar with the chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." You familiar with that?
I am.
Do you know what it means?
I do.
Can you explain it to us?
Senator, that is a chant that speaks of Palestinian desire for its homeland and a very expansive definition of its homeland at the expense of the independence of Israel.
Well, indeed. I mean, it calls for the elimination of Israel, does it not?
It does.
So my question to you is, should students who are here on a visa, who gather and chant that slogan and actively advocate for the elimination of Israel and attacks on Jewish individuals, whether in the Middle East or here in the United States, as we're seeing on college campuses, should those students have their visas revoked?
Senator, I believe you are referencing a provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act about which you have written to me, and I am very familiar with your assertion that that statutory provision requires the revocation of their visa.
But should they have their visas revoked? I'm asking you.
We are assessing your legal assertion. It is a matter of legal interpretation of the statute.
Well, just as a moral matter, I mean, should students who are here, foreigners who are here in this country, accessing our university system and advocating for the killing of Jews, should they be allowed to stay here at our leisure?
Senator, it is a matter of law, and it requires a legal interpretation, and I am not in a position to provide that legal interpretation. And let me add something.
Wait. I just, my time is very limited. I have to say, I think your answer is disappointing, but let me ask you something else.
Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, questioning the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas at today's Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee hearing. The hearing covered many topics, talking about threats to the homeland, everything from fentanyl and human trafficking, gun crime, weapons of mass destruction. Ran several hours. We covered it all, and you can find the full hearing at our website, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Story from thehill.com. The Supreme Court on Tuesday grappled with when public officials can block people on their social media accounts, hearing appeals of two conflicting rulings in a dispute that could vastly change the way officials interact with their constituents online. A few years after the justices sidestepped the issue by tossing as moot a similar lawsuit filed against then-President Donald Trump, social media blocks issued by a city manager in Michigan and two school board members in California brought the issue back to the High Court. At issue is whether an official engages in state action when they block someone on their personal profile or page used to post about their job, which would make the block subject to constitutional protections. That from thehill.com, and we will talk with the legal reporter who wrote that story in just a couple of minutes. But first, some of today's oral argument. In the first case, O'Connor Radcliffe v. Garnier, involving the school board trustees in California, sued by parents who were blocked from the officials' personal accounts on Twitter, now X, and Facebook. Here's Justice Elena Kagan questioning Hashim Mupan, an attorney for the public officials. Justice Kagan brings up an example of former President Donald Trump's personal Twitter account.
But he seemed to be doing, a lot of government on his Twitter account. I mean, sometimes he was announcing policies, even when he wasn't. I mean, I don't think a citizen would be able to really understand the Trump presidency, if you will, without any access to all the things that the president said on that account. It was an important part of how he wielded his authority. And to cut cut a citizen off from that is to cut a citizen off from part of the way that government works.
So a couple of things about that, Your Honor. The first is President Trump could have done exactly the same thing from Mar-a-Lago or a campaign rally. If he gave every one of those speeches at his personal residence, it wouldn't somehow convert his residence into government property. And in terms of people being cut off from it, people don't have a right to access other people's personal property. The blocking here doesn't turn on...
It seems a little bit, to focus on the wrong end of the stick, if you will. I mean, the fact that it was his personal property seems neither here nor there. If really he was doing government on it and wielding his authority on it and announcing policy on it, and it was part of the way government operated.
Well, so here's why I don't think that's quite right, Your Honor. Imagine he had put on his page a clear disclaimer. This is my page that I'm using in my personal capacity to talk about the government. This is not an official page. Every single word on that Twitter account could have been the same.
Attorney Hashim Mupan, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan during today's Supreme Court oral argument. Pamela Karlan is an attorney for the constituents in California who sued in this case. Here she's questioned by Justice Samuel Alito.
Your test is whether government officials are doing their jobs, right?
That's the starting point, and it creates what I would say is a kind of rebuttable assumption that when a government official's doing her job, she is a state actor.
All right, so the mayor is in the grocery store and is repeatedly approached by constituents, and the mayor listens to, really doesn't want to be bothered, but listens to supporters and people who are sympathetic to the mayor's program, but if somebody who is a known opponent approaches the mayor says, look, please call my office. Is the mayor doing his job when he's doing that?
I think the answer to that question, which is, I think, different than the answer I would give in our case, is that when they are clearly off duty, that is, pushing the shopping cart down the aisle, arguably they're not doing their job. But when they create an ongoing site, like the site here, they maintain a forum, if you will, in which people can comment and people can talk to each other. They're not just talking to the mayor. Then yes, that would be state action.
I mean, elected officials have told me they're always on call. They're always doing their job. They're always being approached by constituents.
But if they say they're doing their job, then yes, I would say the starting point is they're state actors. Now, can they say, I don't want to talk to you right now, the ice cream is melting? Of course they can, because that's not violating somebody's First Amendment rights.
But if they're discriminating on the basis of viewpoint and they're doing their job, then there's a problem, right?
Arguably, yes.
Attorney Pamela Karlan, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in the first of two cases today about government officials and their social media accounts. Zach Schoenfeld, courts and legal reporter with The Hill, has been taking a close listen to these cases. Joins us now by phone. Thanks for being with us. You wrote that over roughly 3 hours of arguments, the justice confronted the issue head-on, seemingly struggling at times with applying the First Amendment to the digital world. What did you take away from the oral arguments?
Well, this has been a legal issue that has been bubbling up for the past few years, and maybe even longer than that, as public officials now is the norm for them to communicate with their constituents on social media. We had almost resolved this legal issue a few years back when then President Trump had been blocking people on what was then known as Twitter. There was a lawsuit filed against him, but after he left the White House, that lawsuit was tossed as moot, which left the legal question unresolved until now. And now we are dealing with these sets of local officials. One case, it's a local official from Michigan. The other case, it's school board members in California. And the big question here is whether First Amendment protections apply when these public officials ban their constituents on social media accounts. But the question becomes very difficult because sometimes these local officials' accounts aren't necessarily unambiguously official or personal. And oftentimes it can be a mix of photos of families and pets, while at the same time using these accounts to communicate about their job. So what we saw during arguments today was the justices really trying to grapple with that and how to apply the First Amendment doctrine that is centuries old to these new and emerging technologies.
And could you get a sense from the questions and the answers which way the rulings might go?
So I'm not sure in terms of these particular cases that have kind of bubbled up through the courts, these school board members, in terms of how their specific accounts might go. I'm not completely sure. But in terms of the broader legal issue and the legal test that they'll establish, which will be used in courts across the country, I think you did see a lot of the justices start to coalesce around some sort of test that asks something like whether the account is being used to exercise a duty or an authority of their governmental office. I think we'll still have to wait and see exactly where they draw the line. There were a lot of questions about, for example, is a repost the same as just making an original post? Should we treat those differently? What about an account that has a disclaimer on it saying that it's only for personal use and not an official account? So I think some of those more, some of the minutiae, we'll have to wait and see in the opinion. But I think generally you saw a lot of the justices probably going to use some language of something like state authority or duty.
Every time a case or two comes up about new technology, the question is asked whether the justices who are older than the average American, whether they understood what was going on here. Did you get the sense that that they related well to social media?
I think, compared to some of the recent cases that we've seen that have involved technology, I don't think we saw the justices getting as confused as I've seen in some past cases. For example, last term when there were questions about Section 230 in Google, I think there were a lot of confusion in those. Definitely still a little bit today where you could see that. Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the court's leading conservatives, at one point, he just said, I'm not a Facebook person. So I think some of the justices were not shy in saying that they are not regular users of these platforms. But I think generally speaking, they did seem to have a handle on this particular issue in terms of how these accounts work. And, this, I think, is more of a fairly straightforward tech case with just talking about the basics of a Facebook page or a Twitter account and doesn't get too much into the weeds of complicated algorithms in these new technologies.
Talking with Zach Schoenfeld from The Hill. The cases involved local government. The federal government, though, was weighing in. Which side and why?
So the federal government had been backing the officials in both of these cases. But the U.S. government had come in, the Biden administration, the Justice Department, really focusing on a particular aspect of that argument, and that is in terms of how does property play a role here, and whether we should consider these social media accounts, whether we should consider them personal and private property or public property. So I think you saw the U.S. kind of getting into some of those issues. But generally speaking, they did file briefs and are backing both sets of these officials.
And finally, you mentioned that there was a case involving former President Trump a few years ago, and it was deemed moot. Depending upon how these cases go, how might this affect members of Congress, for instance?
I think whichever way that this case does go, you could see impacts. Not only, here we're talking about local officials, but I think you're going to see the same thing just applies just as much to different federal officials. Whether we're talking about, if President Trump does win in 2024, I think then you could see the question coming back up on whether his blocks on what is now X and whether those would be held constitutional, and obviously members of Congress as well. So like I said, although these cases really deal with these local officials, school board members in Southern California and a city manager in a town in Michigan, folks who do not have a big name brand, it certainly will also impact the politicians who have a much bigger audience on social media.
Zach Schoenfeld, courts and legal reporter with The Hill. His stories are at thehill.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And some other Supreme Court-related news. The U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, has announced plans to subpoena, as Associated Press writes it, Republican mega-donor Harlan Crow and conservative activist Leonard Leo for more information about their roles in organizing and paying for luxury travel for Supreme Court justices. Senator Durbin saying this is the next step in the committee's ongoing investigation of the ethics of the Supreme Court. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell saying what he's targeting here is private citizens with no legislative purpose. I think it's completely and totally inappropriate. Wall Street today, the Dow up 123, NASDAQ up 61, S&P up 26. President Biden announcing another step in his campaign against what he calls junk fees, the hidden and sometimes misleading charges by various private businesses. The Labor Department has proposed a rule to make it harder for financial advisors, brokers, and insurance agents who give advice about retirement plans, such as 401ks and IRAs, to recommend investments that are not in the saver's best interest, but may pay the advisor a higher commission. President Biden spoke at the White House.
Many Americans spend their whole lives working, putting every dime left at the end of the month in their retirement account. So after working hard for decades, they can retire with dignity and a little bit of security. And many families get advice from financial advisors in doing that, and to help them out because they don't know. They don't know annuity from snooty. But think about it, all kidding aside. Think about the average family. Now let me be clear about something. Most financial advisors give their clients good advice at a fair price and are honest with them. But that's not always the case. Some advisors and brokers steer their clients towards certain investments not because of the best interest of the client, because it means the best payout for the broker. I get it, understand it, but I just want you to know we're watching. You know, to put it colloquially, look, they're putting their self-interest ahead of their client's best interest. And they're scamming Americans out of hard-earned money. People should be able to trust that when they get advice from a so-called expert, they're getting real help, not getting ripped off.
President Biden today at the White House, he said that requiring advisors to make recommendations in the saver's best interest can increase retirement savers' returns by up to 1.2% per year. He said that could amount to 20% at the end of the saving and the start of the retirement, and that could be tens of thousands of dollars a year for middle-class families. The Labor Department's proposed rule will be open for public comment for 60 days. From the Washington Post, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, Democrat from Oregon, who has spent nearly 3 decades in Congress, announced Monday night that he does not plan to seek re-election next year. He is 75 years old, said in a Facebook post, "I have dedicated my career to creating livable communities where people are safe, healthy, and economically secure. This mission has guided my involvement on a wide range of issues that have been very rewarding for me and productive for our community. Now it's time to refocus on a narrower set of priorities." Congressman Blumenauer was first elected in a special election in 1996, and C-SPAN spoke to him on the day that he was sworn in.
Well, I first became involved in politics, actually testifying here when I was a college student on the constitutional amendment to lower the voting age. I was elected to the Oregon legislature when I was 23. I sort of got interested in the process. I served several terms there, chaired the tax committee, school finance. I've been in local government since then as a county commissioner and most recently as the elected commissioner of public works of the city of Portland. Spent a lot of time working on environment, land use, transportation issues, and I'm really looking forward to jumping into the fray here and as this session winds down.
When did you first flip on maybe C-SPAN and look at the floor of the House and say, I might be able to do that?
Well, I've always obviously been interested in federal activities. I've spent a lot of time back here working on particular issues. But this last year produced a set of circumstances for the first time. I haven't had kids at home. My daughter's graduating from high school and going off to college, a congressional vacancy. And the issues that I care about in terms of protecting the environment or transportation, these federal partnerships have been put at risk by some of the policies back here. And it was sort of a convergence of things that I cared about that were important to Oregon and the country, and personal circumstances that led me to make this race.
Congressman Earl Blumenauer, Democrat from Oregon, in May 1996 on his first day in office, that from C-SPAN's video library. Congressman Blumenauer has announced he's not going to seek re-election in 2024 after the 14 two-year terms. By the way, in that first interview, he was wearing a bow tie, which he continued to wear and become known for in the years since. And finally, it is Halloween. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden spent last night at a decorated White House handing out treats to public school students and military-connected children. Today, there was candy in the White House briefing room.
Hi. I think we have some candy. Happy Halloween, everybody. We have some candy for you all.
for having our family. Thank you.
Oh, that was lovely. It was really lovely meeting so many folks here as kids and families, and so hopefully everyone had a wonderful time, and we were happy to host all of you and your families. All right, don't be fighting over the candy now. It's enough for everybody. Happy Halloween and good afternoon.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre starting off her briefing. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.